The Four Horsemen were the ultimate KeyForge chase cards when Call of the Archons first came out, coveted enough to skyrocket the decks they appeared in to exorbitant prices. They appeared in House Sanctum as the Horsemen of Pestilence, Famine, War, and Death, possessing powerful and unique effects that could be quite potent when used correctly. However, a few sets later in Mass Mutation, a new set of chase cards was introduced, the 7 Deadly Sins, consisting of Greed, Gluttony, Pride, Envy, Sloth, Wrath, and Desire. The sins truly were made for each other, working off each other with a strength of synergy found in few other places in the game. Whereas with the Horsemen, all 4 would always appear together in a deck, the sins did not operate that way. It was rare to find a deck with all 7, or even 6, all together in one deck. They would usually appear in groups of 3 or 4. Obviously, there are other chase cards out there, such as Time Traveler and Help from Future Self, or Tiny the Chained, with his copies over Tanu's Binding. But the Horsemen and the Sins are, I believe, 2 of the better known ones, famous for their rarity, potency, and collectability. Today, these 2 sets of prominent creatures will go head to head in a battle to determine which is superior, which is more dangerous to come across when 2 Archons meet on the battlefield. Let's get started. We'll begin by taking a look at the Horsemen. First is the Horseman of Pestilence, who deals 1 damage to each non-Horseman creature every time he's played, fights, or reaps. The Horseman of Famine straight up destroys the least powerful creature whenever he's played, fights, or reaps. The Horseman of War reads, play, for the remainder of the turn, each friendly creature can be used as if they were in the active house but can only fight. And lastly, the Horseman of Death returns each Horseman creature from your discard pile to your hand when he's played, allowing you to recur the Horsemen if they get destroyed. And let me tell you, it looks very impressive when all 4 of them are lined up and ready for action. First off, each of these creatures is 5 power, and that's a threat on its own. 5 power is comparable with much of what you'd find in Brobnar or Saurian. That prevents Famine taking himself or any of his fellow horsemen out much of the time, although that's one common point of anti-synergy Famine can bring to a deck. In one of my Horseman decks, Shadows is one of the 3 houses, meaning Famine's play fight reap effect will oftentimes hit my own creatures, like Carlo Phantom or Bad Penny. But if you're in a situation where the opponent has the smallest creature on the board, Famine is really useful, especially seeing as some of the creatures with the strongest effects have the lowest power. The Horseman of Pestilence can have a similar problem, since dealing damage to your own creatures can be annoying sometimes. However, Pestilence has a card that combos extraordinarily well with it, Cleansing Wave. Pestilence plus Cleansing Wave is usually pretty consistent and reliable, and often leads to a huge burst out of nowhere. The deck I referenced before has this combo, and I will almost always chain myself for it because it's so worth it. On its own, Cleansing Wave can be difficult to make effective, often requiring lots of prior setup, but with the Horseman of Pestilence it couldn't be easier. Now, the Horseman of War's potency varies drastically depending on what else you have in your deck. If your deck really does not want to fight, War probably won't do much for you. But in a deck with lots of skirmish creatures, or something like Brobnar to complement the Horseman of War, it can be really effective in clearing the opponent's board. There are a couple other pieces that combo with it as well, Cleansing Wave being one of them, but another being Potion of Invulnerability, keeping your creatures from taking damage when you fight with them. And of course, creatures with good fight effects are wonderful with War as well, such as Umbra, Overlord Grekking, Stealer of Souls, or Quixo the Adventurer. And lastly, there's the Horseman of Death, who works exactly as he says he does. It can be extremely frustrating for the opponent when you bring back from the discard pile all the horsemen they just dedicated resources towards killing, and can result in that impressive horseman lineup I mentioned earlier. However, it's really irritating when he shows up in your first or second hand, rendering his play effect useless and meaning you'll probably only get to play your horseman through 1 time. If you have a way to archive him in this situation, that's ideal. So, those are the 4 horsemen, strong on their own, but even stronger with the right cards to accompany them. But the question is, how well do they stack up against the 7 deadly sins from Mass Mutation? One of the simplest of the sins is Sloth, who reads, at the end of your turn, if you did not use any creatures this turn, gain 1 ember for each friendly sin creature. I find he tends to be most potent when you first play him, along with a number of other sins, then end your turn for a small burst. Besides that, you really just need to determine for yourself down the road if not using any creatures is worth Sloth's effect, or if using creatures would result in a better turn. Another simple one is Greed, who reads, during your draw card step, refill your hand to 1 additional card for each friendly sin creature. This is a favorite among many players, because the deck efficiency he offers will often surpass even that of Zenzi Zenzi Zenzik, allowing you to draw more cards than Zenzi without the requirement of him being in the center of your battle line. With 3 or more sins, drawing up to 9 or so cards at the end of every turn will undoubtedly put you ahead of the opponent in one way or another. Next we have Wrath, who's loaded up with Taunt, Poison, and Skirmish, and reads Fight for each friendly Sin creature and Rage an enemy creature. Wrath is an important element of the Sin's arsenal, allowing for some insane protection of your other Sins, or just other creatures. The 3 keywords he has would have been enough, and the fight effect is really just an added disruptive bonus, and the 3 armor can be difficult to get through via direct damage, meaning fighting will probably be the best way to get rid of him. As if Wrath's protection wasn't enough, we also have Pride, who wards each friendly Sin creature when she reaps, including herself. And let me tell you, nothing is scarier than facing up against a board of warded Sins. You know you're in for it when that happens. There's also Envy. If there are 2 or more friendly Sin creatures, capture all of your opponent's Ember. Envy can be a massive nuisance, and can buy you an extra turn or 2 if need be. But the card that goes best with Envy in my opinion is the Sin Gluttony. Gluttony reads, play, exalt Gluttony once for each friendly Sin creature. Reap, move each Ember from friendly creatures to your pool. Paired with Envy, this Reap effect can be straight up busted, essentially stealing all of your opponent's Ember with just a couple reaps, which get you Ember in of themselves. And Gluttony, being 6 power, is not easy to take off the board. Any of the Sins are worth protecting with Wrath, but I think Gluttony is one of the most worthy candidates. Then there's Desire, who's an entire key cheat. Desire reads, keys cost +4. Reap, forge a key at current cost, reduced by 1 Ember for each friendly Sin creature. So, if we set up a scenario in which Desire is out, meaning keys would cost 10, with 3 other Sins, that means you would get to forge a key at 6, which is even stronger than a key charge. And since Desire is a creature, this means that if the Sins are left undealt with, you can do this turn after turn. At max value, with all 7 Sins out on the board, you could forge a key at a mere 3 Ember, repeatedly, and that's ridiculous. It really solidifies just how strong these guys are when they're together. And that's one of the most important facets of the Sins. They build off each other. They almost remind me of House Mars in that regard. They're very self-contained in how they operate, and they get stronger the more you have on the board. With Mars, a single John Smith isn't doing you much good on its own, nor is Blipip going to be very useful if you don't have any Mars creatures in hand to play. A similar standing applies to the Sins. 1 Sin on its own won't do much. You'd only get to draw 1 extra card with Greed, and Gluttony would only be exalted once when played. You can't even use Envy's Reap effect when it's on its own. But with numerous Sins on the board, they really start taking off, getting to draw 4 extra cards with Greed, or gaining 5 Ember with Sloth for not using any creatures, or stealing all your opponent's Ember having Envy and Gluttony paired. You can see in each Sin's text that they are meant to work with each other, each referencing other friendly Sin creatures and the way their effect will adjust accordingly. Ultimately, the 4 Horsemen seem very tame compared to the Sins. War's play effect can lead to 1 huge fighting turn, but that's about it. Death's play effect offers some great recurability, but won't always be very useful, and only happens once. Pestilence's effect is pretty minor, although the damage can definitely build up turn over turn. I'd have to say Famine is the more dangerous of the 4, straight up destroying a creature every time it does something, although War would be a close contender in the right circumstances. Many of the Sins, on the other hand, offer turn over turn value. Greed is a fantastic example of this, as is Pride or Wrath. The Sins don't rely on cards from outside themselves to aid them, like the Horsemen do, with Cleansing Wave or Potion of Invulnerability. They combo off each other with a synergy the Horsemen don't have, and with more explosive effects to boot. The Horsemen can't cheat a key, draw you up to 10 cards, or move every Ember you've captured throughout the game to your pool. Sure, the Sins can't let you fight with your entire board, nor can you really get them back once they're destroyed, unless you've gone through your deck, but these seem minimal compared to what they can do when they are on the board. In the end, there seems to be quite a large disparity between the Horsemen and the Sins, and it looks to me like the Sins have the upper edge. So, having reached the end of this very first versus battle, I have to declare the 7 Deadly Sins victorious over the 4 Horsemen. Let me know what you guys think about the Horsemen and the Sins, how they compare, if you agree, disagree. I'm interested to hear your input. I think this will become a series, the Versus series, so let me know in the comments what sorts of things in KeyForge, cards, sets, anything like that you want to see pitted up against each other. Thank you all so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you all again in the next one. See you later.